Once upon a time, in a faraway land, there was a peaceful kingdom covered with white snowy forests. Right in the center of that kingdom stood a beautiful and grand castle. Everyone who saw it always stopped to admire it. Inside that castle lived a young and kind queen. She was very beautiful, gentle, and loved by all the people. But even though she had a happy and comfortable life, the queen carried one deep wish in her heart. She wished to become a mother. One cold winter day, the queen was sitting by the window, sewing quietly. Snowflakes were falling softly outside. While sewing, she accidentally pricked her finger with her needle. A drop of bright red blood fell onto a piece of white cotton. The queen looked at it and smiled softly. Then she whispered, "I wish to have a baby girl, with skin as white as snow, eyes shining like a precious jewel, and lips red like a cherry. I hope she will have a heart full of joy and happiness." And then a miracle happened. A few months later, the queen gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. She looked like a tiny angel. The king was overjoyed and named the baby Snow White. But sadly, their happiness did not last long. The queen became very sick and soon passed away, leaving the king and the little princess alone in great sorrow. Many years went by. Because the king was lonely and weak, he decided to marry again. His new wife was stunningly beautiful, so beautiful that everyone stared whenever she walked by. But behind her perfect face was a cold, jealous, and selfish heart. This new queen had a secret. She owned a magic mirror. Every day she stood in front of it, touched her long hair proudly, and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" And the magic mirror always answered the same, "Your Majesty, you are the most beautiful." Hearing this made the queen smile with pride. But under her rule, the peaceful castle began to change. Her jealousy, selfishness, and cruel orders made everyone in the castle live in fear. One day, Snow White grew older and became a lovely young girl. Her smile was warm and gentle, and her beauty shone like sunlight. This made the queen feel afraid and angry. She asked the mirror again, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" But this time, the mirror shook slightly and answered, "Your Majesty, you are no longer the fairest. Snow White is now the most beautiful." The whole room went silent. The queen's eyes widened, her hands shook with rage, her face twisted with jealousy. And at that moment, deep inside her dark heart, a terrible plan was born. She refused to accept that anyone could be more beautiful than her. So, she called her most loyal hunter and ordered in a cold, icy voice, "Take Snow White deep into the forest and bring back her heart." That very moment, Snow White, who knew nothing, was brought before the queen. The queen pretended to smile kindly. "My dear Snow White, you must be so bored in the castle. Go enjoy a walk in the forest. The hunter will keep you safe." Snow White did not know that every step she took toward the forest was a step closer to the queen's deadly trap. And when the castle doors closed behind her, the queen watched Snow White leave with eyes filled only with coldness and cruel hatred. The hunter took Snow White deep into the forest. The path became darker, the trees grew taller, and the wind howled through the branches. Snow White held her hands tight, her eyes wide with fear, but she tried her best to stay calm. When they reached a quiet, empty part of the forest, the hunter stopped. His face showed great sadness and pain. Finally, he dropped his knife on the ground and let out a heavy sigh. "Princess, I can't do this," he said with a shaking voice. Snow White looked confused. "What do you mean?" "The queen, she ordered me to kill you." Snow White felt cold all over. But before fear could stop her, the hunter grabbed her hand and whispered quickly, "Run, run far away. Never go back to the castle. If you return, you will never escape again." After saying that, he turned and ran back toward the castle, leaving Snow White alone in the huge, dark forest. Snow White ran through the winding paths, terrified. Long shadows from the trees stretched across the ground, like dark hands trying to grab her. Dry leaves crackled under her feet, making her run even faster. Finally, exhausted, she leaned against a big tree. Evening came quickly. Owls hooted, birds flew above her, and the wind made scary sounds through the branches. The forest felt alive, but in a frightening way. Unable to bear the loneliness, Snow White began to cry. Her tears fell onto the ground, shining softly in the moonlight, and with her face still wet with tears, she slowly fell asleep. The next morning, Snow White felt something gently touching her hand. She opened her eyes and gasped. Around her were small, friendly forest animals, bluebirds, brown squirrels, white rabbits, and even a tiny baby deer. They weren't afraid of her at all. They looked at her with kind, caring eyes, as if they knew she had been through something terrible. Snow White whispered softly, "Friends, can you help me? I don't know where to go." The animals seemed to understand. They all ran in one direction, then looked back at her, asking her to follow. Even though she was still scared, Snow White walked after them. After a long walk, she saw a small, cute house in the forest. It looked tiny, almost like it was made for children, but it felt warm and welcoming. Snow White knocked on the door. No one answered. She pushed the door gently, and it opened. Inside, everything was tiny. Tiny table, tiny chairs, tiny pots and pans. Everything was adorable, but also extremely messy. Maybe children live here? Snow White thought. Because she had nowhere else to go, she decided to clean the house to calm herself down. She washed the dishes, swept the floor, wiped the tables, and even cooked a small meal using the tiny kitchen tools. When the house was clean and smelled nice, Snow White became very tired. But the beds were all too small, so she put 2 of them together and lay down. In less than 2 minutes, she fell into a deep sleep. That evening, the door opened again. 7 tiny people walked in, wearing little hats and carrying mining tools. They were happy, grumpy, clumsy, lazy, shy, sleepy, and wise. But the moment they walked inside, they froze. The house was spotless. The table was full of food. "Who cleaned everything?" Happy shouted. Clumsy tried to pick up a bowl of soup, but, of course, spilled it everywhere. Wise frowned. "This is strange, very strange." All 7 tiptoed upstairs, and in the small bedroom, they found a beautiful girl sleeping in their beds. "Oh my goodness," Shy whispered, blushing. Snow White woke up in shock. She saw 7 pairs of round eyes staring at her. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for entering your house. I didn't mean any harm." Wise smiled kindly. "If you meant harm, you wouldn't have cleaned our house this well." Happy introduced everyone. After listening to her story, the 7 dwarfs were shocked and also very sad for her. Wise said gently, "You must stay here. We will protect you." Snow White's heart filled with happiness. A new home, new friends. Maybe this forest would finally be a safe place for her. But none of them knew that far away, in a cold, dark corner of the castle, the queen was already planning her next terrible attack. While Snow White was enjoying peaceful days with the 7 dwarfs, something terrible was happening back at the castle. A storm of anger was rising. The queen stood in front of her magic mirror. Her cold eyes looked sharp enough to break the glass. She asked her usual question, but this time her voice was not proud anymore. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror shook. A thin cloud of smoke curled around it, and a dark voice replied, "Your Majesty, you are beautiful, but not the most beautiful. Snow White is the fairest in the world." The words stabbed the queen's pride like a knife. She squeezed her hands so tightly that her nails cut into her skin. "No! Impossible! That girl must die. This time, I will do it myself." The queen rushed into her secret lab, a dark room filled with poisons, strange bottles, and old magic books. It looked like a witch's cave. She opened a torn, ancient book and flipped to a page with big red letters. "Eternal Sleep Apple. One bite brings a sleep that can never be broken." She read a spell. Black smoke wrapped around a plain apple. When the smoke faded, the apple turned bright red, so red that anyone who saw it would want to take a bite. But inside was death. The queen smiled, a quiet, evil smile that could make anyone shiver. She put on a disguise, a bent old woman with messy white hair and a shaky voice. No one could recognize her now. "Snow White, get ready. This time, you will never escape." The next morning, Snow White kissed each dwarf on the cheek as they left for work. Wise reminded her again, "Remember, no matter what, don't open the door for anyone." Snow White smiled gently. I know, don't worry." But that smile would soon break every viewer's heart. While Snow White was cutting vegetables for lunch, she heard a knock. Knock, knock, knock. She jumped. "Who is it?" A weak, shaky voice answered, "I am just a poor old woman. Please, my child, may I have some water or a little bread? I am so tired." Snow White peeked through the crack in the door. A tiny, trembling old lady stood outside with a small basket. Nothing looked strange. Poor woman. She must be hungry, Snow White whispered. And she opened the door. The old woman smiled sweetly, hiding her wicked plan. "My beautiful girl, I have nothing to give you except this red apple. Please try it, just one bite. It tastes like heaven." Snow White hesitated, but the apple looked perfect, so shiny, so delicious. And Snow White was too kind. She reached out and took the apple. She took a bite. Crunch! 1 second later, her eyes opened wide in shock. Her body shook. Then, she fell to the floor like a snowflake dropping from the sky. The queen laughed, her voice sharp like a knife. "What is beauty, if you can't open your eyes to see the world?" She left the half-eaten apple on the floor and disappeared into the forest, proud of her wicked victory. Later that afternoon, the 7 dwarfs came home. The moment they stepped inside, they froze. Wise spotted the apple on the ground and shouted, "No, it's a poisoned apple!" They ran to Snow White. Clumsy cried loudly. Grumpy held her hand tightly. None of them had ever been this heartbroken before. With no way to save her, they placed Snow White in a beautiful glass coffin, so every animal in the forest could see the princess they loved. The whole forest fell silent. No birds sang. No leaves moved. Only sadness filled the air like a cold fog. And just then, from far away, a prince rode his horse through the forest. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change forever. That day, the prince was riding his horse along a small path in the forest. Sunlight shined through the leaves and made bright spots on the ground. He was looking for water to drink when he heard strange sounds from the forest birds. The sounds were not happy like usual. They sounded like the birds were calling him. Curious, the prince followed the little birds. They led him to an open space in the forest, where a glass coffin sparkled in the sunlight. And inside the glass coffin was Snow White. The prince froze. She was the girl he once saw reflected in the river. The girl whose smile and gentle beauty he could never forget. He walked closer, unable to look away from her peaceful face. The cold glass around her made his heart hurt. The 7 dwarfs stood nearby with their heads down. Wise spoke softly, his voice shaking. "She was the kindest person we ever knew. Prince, she was put under the curse of the poisoned apple." The prince placed his hand on the cold glass. She cannot end like this. A strange feeling filled his heart. Sadness, hope, and love, all at the same time. He bent down and gave Snow White a gentle kiss on her forehead. It wasn't magic. It was a true kiss, filled with all his love. And in that moment, a miracle happened. A warm breath came from Snow White's lips. Her eyelashes moved. Her fingers twitched gently. Then, Snow White opened her eyes. Her eyes sparkled like 2 tiny stars. The 7 dwarfs began to cry with joy. The prince almost couldn't believe it, but he quickly held her hand and whispered with a shaking voice, "Snow White, you're alive." Snow White looked at him and smiled softly, the smile the forest had been waiting for. "You saved me?" Meanwhile, in the castle, the king, Snow White's father, learned what had happened to his daughter. He became furious. He ordered the magic mirror to be destroyed and drove the evil queen out of the kingdom forever. The mirror broke into thousands of pieces, and it felt like all of the queen's pride and cruelty disappeared with it. Snow White returned to the castle filled with joy. The whole kingdom celebrated her awakening. Snow White and the prince stood together by a tall window as warm light shined down on them like a blessing. Not long after, they had a beautiful wedding. Laughter filled the castle. White flowers covered the walkway, and from that day on, Snow White, the prince, the king, and the 7 dwarfs lived in happiness, peace, and love that never faded. And their story is still told again and again as a reminder that a good heart will always defeat the darkness.